One of the most exciting elements about the transition over to a next-generation console is the substantial leaps we can see from both a visual and gameplay perspective. And it gets increasingly more exciting when you think about it as a Nintendo fan. Nintendo fans have grown accustomed to seeing Nintendo-developed titles on weaker hardware. This is a strategy Nintendo adopted since the era of the Wii. And yet despite making their games on weaker hardware, Nintendo has found a way to maximize the hardware and output games that stand out from both a visual and gameplay perspective. But something else we've been accustomed to as a Nintendo fan over the years are 4 to 6 year gaps when it comes to their hardware. But this time around, as we anticipate the transition over to Nintendo Switch 2, we're looking at essentially at least an 8-year gap here. So the amount of time between a hardware jump is more significant, which also suggests a more significant leap in technology. So with this in mind, it has me thinking about the kinds of leaps we could be seeing from Nintendo developers on Nintendo Switch 2. And looking over the information we have, it looks to be quite substantial, and it's extremely exciting. So that's what we're getting into today on AndresRestart. Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are focusing on how multiple game series from Nintendo are looking to be taking substantial leaps for Nintendo Switch 2. A Nintendo developer that's responsible for a great variety of Nintendo games is Monolith Soft, a company that's been wholly owned by Nintendo for some time now. They are responsible for the Xenoblade games, but they are also responsible for support development of the Zelda series, Splatoon, and Animal Crossing. And we've recently gotten word that they are looking to make some substantial leaps going into the next generation. So there was a recent interview conducted by cgworld.jp with some of the higher-ups at Monolith Soft. So reading here, the first step towards building an organization that enables large-scale development. CG World, hereinafter referred to as CGW. Today I would like to talk about the R&D team that was established at Monolith Soft. First, please briefly tell us about the roles of Mr. Takahashi and Mr. Inaba in the R&D team. Tetsuya Takahashi, hereinafter referred to as Takahashi. As a director of Monolith Soft, I not only manage the company, but also oversee the development site. I have also been in charge of overseeing the R&D team for about a year now. Before we continue on, I just want to say that we're not going to be reading off this entire interview, just some key points. But Tetsuya Takahashi is also responsible for being at the head of the Xenoblade games. He is essentially the reason Monolith Soft exists, and what I find extra curious here is that here he's saying that he's been overseeing the R&D team for about a year now. If we go back to about a year ago, it was just a few months removed from the completion of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and its DLC. But continuing on, Michihiko Inaba, hereinafter Inaba. I was originally a programmer, and at Monolith Soft, I was in charge of programming the drawing engine for the Xenoblade series. I was a dedicated programmer until Xenoblade Chronicles 3, but after that I took on the role of producer and director of the R&D team. So here's someone else that after Xenoblade Chronicles 3, they made a shift and started working more so on this new R&D team about a year ago. Perhaps a little bit more because he's referencing Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and not necessarily the DLC, but there's a little bit of wiggle room there. But point is that as they were finishing up development for Xenoblade Chronicles 3, they started to transition over a bit more focus on this R&D team, which I do think implies that they are transitioning over to next generation development and trying to organize things a bit better for the next phase of their games. So yeah, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 probably the last big Switch game. Maybe they throw out a remaster, but Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is their last huge project for Switch 1. Continuing on though, CGW. Next, please tell us about the background and purpose of the R&D team. Takahashi. Although we launched the R&D team, we had been working on R&D even before that. Monolith Soft is a developer, so we do not have the manpower leeway compared to publishers. Publishers can easily hire dedicated personnel and challenge R&D as a company asset. But in our case, since title development is the main focus, we did not have much manpower leeway for future investment. When we were developing Xenoblade Chronicles 2 back in 2017, we only had a few dozen in-house programmers and we were overwhelmed with development alone. We were not in a position to organize an R&D team. CGW, so that was the situation at the time. And actually what's interesting about this is if you think back to Xenoblade Chronicles 2, there was a common sentiment that Xenoblade Chronicles 2, while it didn't make it out in 2017 in December for that launch year of Switch 1, it also felt a little bit rushed. There was a little bit of things that were lacking in polish, which they fixed up a bit afterwards with some DLC and just overall updates. But there were issues. They could not make the entire game in-house. They needed to get outside help. Continuing on though, Takahashi, that situation continued for a while. But then we started developing titles with Nintendo that would be enjoyed by tens of millions of customers around the world, and as the scale of development became larger, the level of demands for development also increased. So what I believe he's referring to here is that while the Xenoblade games might sell 2 to 3 million, which is certainly nice during this Switch era, Monolith Soft has also assisted in development for Splatoon 2, a game that sold well over 10 million, Breath of the Wild, a game that sold well over 30 million, Animal Crossing, a game that I believe is over 40 million, and so they were a significant part to these major projects that are some of the biggest sellers on Nintendo Switch. Takahashi, so it's no longer the era where you can do it with a small number of people. We thought that we can't rely on human wave tactics forever, and felt that we needed to create an organization that would approach development from a technical perspective to reduce the amount of work required and improve efficiency. That's why we decided to launch an R&D team. So now, after having gone through an entire generation where Monolith Soft is in part responsible for some of the best sales Nintendo has ever seen, going into the next generation where they're looking to essentially follow up the Switch with a sequel in the Switch 2 where they may see similar levels of success, they're gearing an R&D team to better take advantage of this and streamline their development process. But what sorts of improvements could we actually be seeing from this now newly established R&D team at Monolith Soft? Well, checking a later segment into the interview, CGW. As for the third tool development for designers, you are also working on tool development for Houdini, Substance 3D Designer, Maya, etc., right? Inaba. For example, in Houdini, we are working on the development of simulation and procedural placement tools. In recent title development, we have created a mechanism to procedurally place background elements using Houdini. This has enabled us to efficiently process a large amount of background that would be impossible to achieve by hand. A task that would have taken 20 days can now be completed in just 30 minutes, which is a huge achievement. We plan to continue to strengthen this area. In the example shown here, all background assets, including roads, are placed procedurally, and the dirt and grass maps transition naturally near the roads. Although we can only show the wireframe in this example, a very natural transition has been achieved. Designers can now quickly build complex backgrounds simply by setting the path curve for the road. And here I'll show the image a little bit, and you can see the wireframe here, this environment that they can now procedurally generate a lot quicker. And they can only show in this form because I assume they don't want to show off something that they actually have in development, but it just goes to show the significant improvements this R&D team is looking to make for overall development at Monolith Soft. A task that would have taken them 20 days can now take just 30 minutes? That is insane. I'll read this last little bit here. Inaba, we are also working on using procedural modeling to automatically generate destructible objects and create variations based on rules. So that's also something extremely interesting, because me having played through all of the Xenoblade games, I can't think of any destructible objects. So this might be something new they're trying to employ into their games. Now, maybe this is speaking more so for Zelda games, because they are also responsible for assisting in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and there is some level of destruction there, although I would say still relatively minimal. That could be speaking to a greater level of destruction in those games, or perhaps both. Or perhaps just games in general like Animal Crossing and Splatoon as well. So there are some significant leaps they look to be taking here, and there are other parts of the interview that make other suggestions like improvements to facial expressions, for example, which when we look at the Xenoblade games, which focus on storytelling, facial expressions are extremely important, so they're looking to make that even more impressive. Hair as well. These different things, they are looking to make even more significant leaps, and that's a big part of why they put together this new R&D team. Now, since you've made it this far, I would like to ask that if you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Moving on from Monolith Soft, let's now talk about EPD10, which is responsible for the 2D Mario games and the Pikmin series. When we take a look at the leaps between Pikmin 3 and Pikmin 4, it's pretty insane. So let me go ahead and read you just this quick excerpt from Eurogamer that helps to highlight some of the leaps here. Jump forward 10 years, then, and Pikmin 4 on Switch is a clear upgrade in several aspects. Firstly, resolution is boosted to a dynamic 900p while docked, normally 810p while adventuring outdoors, while portable play runs at a dynamic 720p, normally 600p. Dynamic resolution scaling response to GPU load wasn't part of Nintendo's in-house engine, so a switch to Unreal Engine 4 allows the game to achieve a better blend of performance and resolution than a fixed resolution would allow. As an added bonus, Nintendo makes use of anti-aliasing for their first time in the series' history here, a luxury not even seen on their recent Pikmin 1 and 2 HD remasters on Switch, and here they have a comparison shot. We actually did a graphics comparison here on the channel a little while back, and there are a variety of improvements that Pikmin 4 has seen over Pikmin 3. You can see right here with this comparison, texture quality, lighting, the models themselves, the scope of the environment. There is so much that's been vastly improved. It's insane. It looks like a next generation leap. But that's part of what kind of blows me away here. Pikmin 3 was made for the Nintendo Wii U. Pikmin 4 came out many years later, sure, but on the Nintendo Switch, which is only marginally more powerful than the Wii U. They essentially fall under the same category of graphical power or tier, and yet they're able to do so much more. Now, part of this is because as the years have progressed, developers have found more and more ways to maximize hardware, but also part of it has to do with the fact that because Nvidia is responsible for the Switch hardware, it's a lot easier to make games using Unreal Engine for the hardware. And that's another interesting change we've seen during this generation. We've seen more Nintendo games being made with Unreal Engine. There's Yoshi's Crafted World, there's Pikmin 4, there's Princess Peach Showtime. And so with this in mind, there will be other Nintendo projects that will likely also take advantage of Unreal Engine, but an even more new version of Unreal Engine for the Nintendo Switch 2, where we're going to be seeing a lot more significant leaps across the board. And again, I would like to point out, the gap between Pikmin 4 and Pikmin 3, these are games made for essentially the same hardware, very close. The Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be such a substantial leap over the Wii U on the Switch, it's going to be intense. So Pikmin 5 is just going to blow Pikmin 3 and Pikmin 4 out of the water when it comes to a visual perspective. Some of this art we've seen from Nintendo of Europe's account when it comes to Pikmin, something like this might be possible. Or like this Ant game, for example. This could be how the next generation of Pikmin looks, except perhaps a bit more colorful. And that would be just amazing. But let's move on to another Nintendo studio that prides himself on making the most cutting-edge games possible for Nintendo hardware. Retro Studios. Now, what's funny about Retro Studios is that they haven't really made any games for Nintendo Switch, outside the port of Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze, which is one of the best-looking 2D games for the Nintendo Wii U, if not the best-looking game for Nintendo Wii U, and then also Metroid Prime Remastered, which is, at the end of the day, just a remaster, but an ambitious one that arguably looks like one of the best games for Nintendo Switch. And for those who are unfamiliar with Metroid Prime Remastered, when they saw Metroid Prime 4 Beyond in the most recent June Nintendo Direct, there was many suggesting that the footage we saw had to have been for Nintendo Switch 2, and there was no way this footage would be for Switch 1. Now, I will tell you, this is absolutely Switch 1 footage that we've seen for Prime 4, but the point is that Retro Studios has put together some impressive visuals for Nintendo hardware. And there is a lot of speculation, in part coming from myself, that Metroid Prime 4 will be a cross-generation title. In other words, there will be an enhanced version of Metroid Prime 4 made for Nintendo Switch 2. I think this kind of game, with how long it's been in development, with the focus at Retro Studios to push hardware overall, with the game not coming out until suspiciously 2025 when we're expecting Switch 2, I think it's very likely there's going to be a cross-gen enhanced version. This would ensure that the game is not only going to be significant when it first comes out for Switch and gets those initial sales, but also has lasting impact to sell for years to come on Nintendo Switch 2. And shoutouts to friend of the channel SuperNoDave64 who pointed this out in one of his recent videos, which will be linked in the description below. But we have seen evidence that Retro Studios has been hiring for ray tracing. So when we check here, this lighting artist that they're looking to hire here, they want someone who has experience using an industry standard renderer like Arnold, Renderman, V-Ray, Octane, Mitsuba, etc. is a plus. So V-Ray and these other renderers strongly suggest ray tracing. So for Switch 2, the cross-gen version of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond may have some improvements that could include some form of ray tracing. Now, as Dave talks about in his video, ray tracing is very demanding. And while the Switch hasn't come out yet, we know it's not going to be as powerful as a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X. But we do think they can maybe take advantage of ray tracing in some small pockets, especially when it comes to Nintendo developers that are focusing on maximizing hardware, something they have a history of doing. And this becomes more believable when we take into account the Gamescom reports. Some of the information that we've gotten is that there was a technical demonstration to show the abilities of the Switch 2 that included that Unreal Engine 5 Matrix demo. But later it was reported that this Matrix demo was taking advantage of DLSS 3.5, ray reconstruction. And so essentially this is NVIDIA's technology for producing ray tracing effects. And it's being said that this is something that will be a part of Switch 2, hence the tech demo showing off what Switch 2 might be able to hypothetically do. And it was spoken of how these ray tracing effects were pretty significant for the Matrix demo. They weren't just nothing, they were something comparable to PlayStation and Xbox. And so going back to this hiring post of a lighting artist, which by the way is no longer out there, presumably because they've already hired the talent for this position, we do have reason to believe that there is going to be ray tracing in some Nintendo games, perhaps even the cross-generation version of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, which, for those who are unaware, ray tracing is simulating real-world lighting effects, which can lead to a lot better-looking lighting effects. And lighting can make a huge difference in terms of how great a game can look. But since we mentioned the Gamescom Matrix tech demo, there is another tech demo that comes to mind. The report also included talk of a technical demonstration of Breath of the Wild running at 4K, not the 900p that it is for Switch, at 60 frames per second, a clean, solid 60 frames per second, not the 30 that can dip sometimes, with essentially no load times. There would probably actually be load times, but the point is that it would be nearly instant. And so if those are the kinds of improvements that they're demonstrating with Breath of the Wild, that has an implication for the future of Legend of Zelda and what Nintendo may be trying to do for their big 3D Zelda games. You look at what's going on with Link's Awakening Remake, Echoes of Wisdom, the 2D top-down Zelda games, and the framerate issues we've seen for those games, but then also the framerate issues we've seen with Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. For Nintendo Switch 2, those framerate issues may be gone, and perhaps we could even be looking at 60 frames per second. Even if the next generation open-air Zelda isn't running at 60, I feel like it might be a reasonable expectation to think that we're at least going to be looking at a rock-solid 30 that never dips. Breath of the Wild was a huge technical achievement for Nintendo. It's something that they didn't want to do until they got to the point of the Wii U. And reminder that the Switch is only marginally more powerful than the Wii U, so when they followed up Breath of the Wild with Tears of the Kingdom, it was still surprising just how much they were able to accomplish with Tears of the Kingdom. Being able to piece together so many different materials using Ultra Hand, being able to still use these materials with different vehicles or crafts, take them throughout the open world, but then shoot up high up into the sky but also straight into the depths below seamlessly, while also engaging with large encampments of enemies that were like a small force, a militia, while also having your own band of allies as well. All this together, still within this open-air framework that has all these different physics systems in mind from Breath of the Wild but improved upon, was an extremely impressive achievement by the Zelda team. And it's something that I don't think is acknowledged enough. But what I think is even more impressive is that they did it for essentially the same hardware. The Switch is only marginally more powerful than the Wii U. What will the Zelda team be able to accomplish on Switch 2? Something that's going to be leaps and bounds more powerful. It's kind of mind-boggling to think about. But at least when taking a look at the reported technical demonstrations for Breath of the Wild, 4K 60 with virtually no load times, that alone would be a substantial improvement. Of course, if they're doing some more advanced things with the next Zelda game, they might not go for 4K, they might not go for 60, but they could have that option. And so thinking about all these different things, faster load times, higher resolutions, better frame rate, ray tracing effects, more Nintendo games taking advantage of the updates from Unreal Engine, the overall just significant improvement of power given how long we've been waiting, the improvements in streamlining we're going to see from the new R&D efforts. All these different elements are going to contribute to a significant, substantial leap for Nintendo games on Switch 2. So it gets me wondering about other projects, like how the next Mario Kart's going to look. We haven't seen a proper modern mainline Mario Kart, technically, since 2014 with the initial release of Mario Kart 8. It's just been improved upon or expanded upon over the years. And then with Super Mario Odyssey, that was the last full proper mainline 3D Mario that came out in 2017. We are expecting updates for both these game series in the early times of Switch 2, perhaps both coming out next year. How amazing are these games going to look and run? What kind of improvements are we going to see? It is extremely exciting to think about. But what do you all think? What do you make of these significant leaps? Let me know in the comments below.